The sun was hitting the surface of the lake just right, making everything look like scattered diamonds. I remember thinking how perfect the water felt against my skin. But then, I noticed that I could see the sunlight getting smaller and smaller above me. Even though I was in Apos, trying to dive, the surface was drifting away. And the strange part, the part that still haunts me, was that I didn't in Apos feel like I was sinking. I felt like the lake was finally telling me a secret it had been holding for a long time. That and Apos, when it happened. I realized I was in Apos, just under the water. I was becoming a part of the silence itself. Teaching children has always been my life's work. You get used to the noise, the laughter, the constant beautiful chaos of a classroom. But that weekend at the lake, it was supposed to be our sanctuary. I remember the smell of pine needles and sunscreen. My kids were playing near the shore, and the water was as still as a mirror. I'm the kind of person who feels everything deeply. I notice the way the light changes, or how a person's voice trembles when they're happy. That afternoon, something felt heavy in the air. Not a bad heavy, just significant. I decided to take a quick swim, just to clear my head from a long week of grading papers. I waded in, the sand squishing between my toes. I can still feel that texture so clearly. The water was warm, almost too warm. I swam out a bit further than usual. I remember looking back at the shore and seeing my family. They looked like small, colorful dots against the green of the trees. Then, a cramp hit my leg. It was sudden, like a cold wire tightening around my muscle. I tried to tread water, but the more I struggled, the more the lake seemed to pull at my hem. I didn't in Apos want to scream. I didn't in Apos want to scare the children. I remember thinking, end quote, I and Apos, LL just take a breath and dive down to rub the muscle out, end quote. But when I went under, I couldn't in Apos find the surface again. The water wasn't in Apos blue anymore. It was a deep, murky gold. I watched a single bubble rise from my lips, and I followed it with my eyes as it floated up toward the sun. And for some reason, I wasn't in Apos. Panicked. I felt this overwhelming sense of transition, like I was a teacher standing at the door of my classroom, waiting for the bell to ring so I could finally go home. The sounds of the surface, the splashing, my husband's voice calling the dog, they started to fade. They were replaced by a low, rhythmic pulsing, like a heartbeat, but it wasn't an Apos my heart. I remember the water entering my lungs. You'd think it would be terrifying, that it would burn or feel like 1,000 needles, but it didn't in Apos. It felt like a warm, heavy blanket being pulled over my head. I stopped fighting. The struggle to reach the surface simply evaporated. I watched the golden light from the sun dancing above me, and for a moment, the ripples looked like the faces of all the children I'd ever taught, smiling down at me. Then, the coldness of the lake was gone. Everything was gone. I felt a sudden, sharp end quote, pop end quote, like a string snapping in the wind, and the weight of my body vanished. I wasn't in Apos Sarah the teacher anymore. I wasn't in Apos Sarah the mother. I was just a point of pure, unfiltered awareness. The darkness that followed wasn't in Apos scary. It was like the soft, velvet quiet of a house after everyone has gone to sleep. I remember thinking, end quote, oh, so this is the secret, end quote. I felt my mind expanding, stretching out far beyond the edges of the lake. There was no pain, no regret, just a profound, quiet curiosity about what was waiting behind the next curtain. I felt like I was floating in a sea of liquid peace. And then, I realized that even though my heart had stopped, I was more, end quote, awake, end quote, than I had ever been in my entire life. I remember this part so clearly. I reached out, not with hands, but with my soul, and I touched the silence. And the silence, it loved me back. I was no longer in the depths. In an instant, I was hovering about 15 feet above the surface of the lake. It was the most extraordinary perspective. I'm a teacher, so I'm used to keeping an eye on a whole playground at once. But this was different. I could see everything. I saw my husband, Mark, diving into the water exactly where I had gone down. I saw the panic in his movements, the way his arms cut through the water with such desperate strength. I saw my children on the shore. They were standing very still. I felt a wave of love so intense it was almost physical, but it wasn't an oppose. A heavy love. It was light. I wanted to reach down and touch Mark's shoulder. I wanted to whisper and quote, "It's okay. I'm right here. I'm not in that body anymore." And quote, because looking at myself, looking at the woman being pulled from the water, it felt like looking at a discarded winter coat. I was grateful for that coat. It had carried me for 34 years, but I didn't an oppose. Needed to be me. Then, I noticed something about the light. It wasn't an oppose. Just coming from the sun anymore. The trees, the water, even the pebbles on the shore, they were all glowing with their own internal light. Everything was connected by these shimmering, translucent threads of gold. I realized that every hello I'd ever said to a student, every hug I'd given my kids, it was all part of this massive, glowing web. The world below was beautiful, but it started to feel distant, like a memory of a dream I was slowly waking up from. I felt a presence behind me. I didn't an oppose. Turn around. I didn't an oppose. Have a neck to turn, but I felt an immense, ancient warmth. It was like standing in front of a giant fireplace on a cold winter night. And then, the lake started to dissolve into a soft, white mist. The mist, it didn't an oppose. Just obscure the lake. It felt like it was washing away the very idea of distance, I was no longer hovering. I was simply there, in a place that wasn't an oppose, a place, but a feeling. If I had to describe the presence I felt, I'd say it was like every moment of safety I'd ever known was combined into one single heartbeat. I felt a surge of love. It wasn't an oppose, the kind of love we talk about in songs. It was a weightless, overwhelming frequency that seemed to vibrate through every cell of my being. I'm a teacher. I spend my days explaining things, but there are no words in any language for this. I felt like I was being read but not like a book, more like a song that was finally being heard by its composer. The presence didn't an oppose. Have a face, but it had a personality. It was ancient, yet it felt as familiar as my own breath. I remember thinking about my students, the ones who struggled, the ones who felt unloved. I felt this sudden, profound understanding that every single one of them was wrapped in this same light, whether they knew it or not. Then, the presence showed me something. It wasn't an oppose. Life review like people say. It was more like life connection, and I saw a moment when I had simply sat with a crying child on the playground. I saw the ripple of that one small act of kindness moving outward, touching people I had never even met. The message was clear, vibrating directly into my soul. And love often survives where words end. And I felt so complete. I didn't an oppose. Want to go back to the hospital, to the bills, to the tired mornings. I felt like I had finally reached the final chapter of a very long, beautiful book. But then, I felt a tug. It wasn't an oppose. A gentle tug. It was a cold, metallic pull that started at the center of my chest. I looked back into the white mist, and I saw a tiny, dark hole opening up. Inside that hole, I could hear the sound of a machine, a steady artificial beep, 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 and I realized the classroom wasn't an oppose, empty yet. Coming back was like being slammed into a heavy, frozen suit. The first thing I felt wasn't the air, it was the weight of my own bones, the weight of the water still clinging to my hair. I heard a frantic, rhythmic thumping, and then I realized it was someone's hands on my chest. Press, press, breathe. When my eyes finally fluttered open, the world was too bright. It was jagged. I saw Mark's face. He was gray, shaking. His eyes were bloodshot. I tried to tell him about the threads of gold. I tried to tell him that I had seen the love he carries for us as a physical light. But all I could do was cough. It took years for me to really, arrive, back in my life. I still teach, but I look at my students differently now. When a child is acting out or when they're quiet and withdrawn, I don't just see behavior, I see that shimmering thread of gold that I saw from above the lake. I know now that we are all connected by something far more durable than breath or heartbeat. Sometimes, when I'm standing by the classroom window and the sun hits the glass just right, I feel a tiny tug in the center of my chest, a reminder of that white mist. I'm not in a hurry to go back. I have too much love left to give here, but I'm not afraid anymore, because I know that when the bell finally rings for the last time, I won't be saying goodbye. I'll just be changing classrooms.